Welcome to the Machine. It's an awfully long song. It's like 7 minutes, so I didn't play the whole thing, but so welcome, folks. Welcome to the Machine. This is Wednesday, February the 22nd on the peoplesinternetradio.com. My name is Catherine April Waters with 2 T's, and my YouTube channel is April Waters with 2 T's, where the podcasts for this show get posted, where you can share, like, and please support, because we definitely need it. And my first guest is standing by, George Webb, who was a former software salesman turned just independent investigative journalist. Is that right, George?
That's correct. Yes. Great to be on your show, Catherine.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I know, you do a lot of interviews, and I always, kind of worry, people are just going to be repeating themselves. I just hope, you don't, get tired of, saying the same stuff over and over and over again. And I know that there's a lot of information that you have, and you've been doing it. So, just kind of, if you can briefly just talk about how you got started doing this.
Well, first off, I've never had an interview resemble another interview.
Okay.
They've all been just completely unique, so I can promise you this one will be the same way.
Oh, good.
And this story really starts right by you in Brooklyn at the Clinton campaign headquarters was in Brooklyn, and then the Clinton Foundation was a little bit uptown on Fifth Avenue, a little bit away from you, where I used to live. On the Avenue of the Americas, but like all of us, we followed during the election. We followed the DNC leaks, and then there was some weird things that happened. This Seth Rich guy kind of got killed, and the Sean Lucas guy at DNC, ended up dead. And then the WikiLeaks started coming out with Podesta, and then the WikiLeaks guy got pushed in front of a train in England, and then the other WikiLeaks guy in England died, and it was weird, but still it wasn't enough for me to say, oh, I've really got to get to the bottom of this. But then, I don't know if you remember, but right before the election, Anthony Weiner's server came out with the 650,000 emails. And there was an article that came out in True Pundit. True Pundit is, an online news source that's a bunch of ex-intelligence community guys and gals. And they basically quoted your NYPD chief of detectives saying, in the 650,000 emails was all this child exploitation, these, covering up of evidence, destruction of evidence, perjury, child trafficking, all this stuff.
Was that a Robert Bose?
I think it's Bryce.
Oh, the NYPD guy that you were talking about.
Yeah, Bryce. I think it's the same.
Okay, Brian.
But but he's kind of like rough voice of NYPD. He's kind of like take a bite out of crime. That guy, the older guy with the white hair, kind of pulled back. And at that point, I said, well, gee, I have to follow this because the CEO. I'm getting a little bit of an echo, so I'll try not to hear that. The CEO of the Clinton Foundation ends up making a run in New York for the Russian embassy or consulate in New York City, which I think is on the Upper East Side around 72nd. I'm not sure. But anyway, that's when I picked up the story, because I said, why is he running?
Okay, great. Okay, so, right, so in these emails from the Weiner guy, 650 emails, this NYPD police chief found all kinds of questionable evidence.
650,000 emails.
Oh, sorry.
So if you remember, Hillary's emails was about 60,000 emails. So I don't know if you remember Trump saying the ones on Weiner's laptop with 650,000 was the treasure trove. And it turns out from FBI documents that I put on my web channel that there was 19 different State Department people, not just Hillary, not just Huma, but 19 different State Department officials that used Gmail accounts to avoid the Public Records Act. So there is a lot of stuff on those emails from 19 different State Department employees. We don't know what they're all about. We don't know how many are classified. We know that there's 2,000 between Huma. I think Huma lives in Brooklyn. I'm not sure. Maybe she lives on the Upper East Side. Who knows? But between Hillary and Huma, about half of them are classified. So we know that about 2,300 of the 650,000 are classified.
And what did they find in this NYPD guy? What did he find in these emails?
Well, if you believe him, he said that there was one folder marked XXX, another folder marked life insurance, sexual exploitation, sexual trafficking, I don't know all, he hasn't really, Boyce, I think maybe that's the name. He hasn't really said much since then, because the word is that Andrew McCabe, who's the number 2 guy at the FBI, had a big crackdown on NYPD, and he retired a lot of officers and threatened to prosecute them with kind of I can't remember, was Eric, the guy was Eric Johnson, the black guy was choked. I can't remember exactly where that occurred, but anyway, there was a lot of threatening and extortion of the NYPD officers and also the FBI officers in New York City who were in the field office. So the Counterterrorism Division, which Andrew McCabe runs, kind of quashed the story, kind of quashed the 650,000 emails.
Right, so of course it gets squashed. Let me just ask you if is any of this related, because I read the Franklin cover-up and I'm almost done reading the Franklin scandal. I mean, is this all kind of connected, related to that? Do you know? Sure.
Well, I mean, if you look at it, what these intelligence agencies want, especially the CIA, is control. The thing they abhor is chance. The thing they abhor is going to Congress and asking for permission for anything. On operations all around the world, and they want to have control over politicians all around the world. And one of the key ways to do that is through blackmail.
Yeah.
So, you have in the Franklin scandal, kids being recruited or kidnapped near Omaha. Boys Town is the number one. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
Yeah, Boys Town's the number one place, and they're being secretly flown to the White House to spend nights at the White House during the George Bush's time in the White House.
George H.W. Bush, right?
George H.W. Bush.
Right.
And I was somewhat involved with the person who wrote that story, that very famous Washington Times story. His name was Paul Rodriguez.
Right.
So fast forward, my connection to Paul Rodriguez, I go to New York, and I'm living on 47th Street. Yeah, 47th Street, Little Brazil, near Times Square.
Cool.
And I'm researching the Jeffrey Epstein case. And Jeffrey Epstein has a thing known as the Stone Fortress up on the Upper West Side, about 82nd Street, I think, is the Stone Fortress. I could be wrong. It could be like 92nd Street. I don't know exactly. But anyway, he's having these kind of parties that start off kind of all well and nice with, the cocktails and so forth. And then there's a little lull in the middle of the party. And then the girls, all the waitresses and guys start coming out in, provocative outfits. And then people make their way to make their way to the door, or people stay if they're interested. And that's kind of the MO of Jeff Epstein's parties. And one of the guys, my roommate, was a Playboy model, and she did a lot of TV and so forth. And she was a waitress at these parties. So I would get, and her boyfriend was a Secret Service agent, so I would get a lot of these stories secondhand. Well, anyway, Trump would go to, I think he went to a number of the parties she was a waitress or a server at, excuse me. And he would go like for 5 minutes. He'd come in, have some pictures taken, be with some supermodel, make sure everybody got his picture, made sure Page 6 got his picture, and then he would leave. So Trump wasn't really entwined in this net, but the idea was, after the girls came out in the provocative outfits, that they'd all go in these rooms, and then Jeff Epstein had all these rooms wired with very low light cameras, like 12, and then they would film these people having, and he had very young girls there, so they would film people having relations with very young girls, and then they would have this blackmail.
Were they was anybody like coerced or drugged or anything like that? Like, kind of, were they entrapped, or was it basically just alcohol and the temptation of a young girl that was enough to hook them in?
The men weren't drugged. Some of the women, this is reports from my roommate, so it's secondhand, but she had two sisters also that were waitresses, so I got their stories as well. But it's the same New York story where the women come in from all over the world. They're beautiful women. They want to make it big. They're a Trump model, or they're a model for Ford, or a model for William Morris or whatever. And then so they're trying to get noticed. They're trying to get exposure. So they take these jobs to be servers at these parties. Now, I believe many of them, especially the younger girls, were drugged, and they didn't know, kind of what hit them. But I obviously wasn't there. I don't have the actual film, but I was given a clip, a thumb drive, well, back then it was to the Sony. It was a memory stick, and I don't know what was on the memory stick, but I took it to Chappaqua, New York, to a reporter, and I took it to Kennebunkport, Maine, to a reporter there, and I took it to meet with a retired FBI guy, and in Lake Champlain, and I took it to Philadelphia, where I met Paul Rodriguez. At least I think I met Paul Rodriguez. He didn't really tell me his name, but we did arrange a meeting there. That story never came out. The story, that photo, the Jeff Epstein thing, never made it to press. But 3 years later, or maybe 4 years later, 2006, Jeff Epstein also had what these are known as, when you secretly film people, is known as a brownstone operation. The story broke about Little St. James Island, where he was doing the same thing in West Palm Beach and also Little St. James Island in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So the story broke anyway, just at a different location.
So, right, in the story, the book of the Franklin cover-up and the Franklin scandal, the FBI, the so-called law enforcement are pretty much all like in on protecting this international child sex. You also talk about, I don't know if like it's all part of the same ring, the organ harvesting that you also talk about.
No, what the FBI at that time, you got to remember that the FBI field offices are very different from the Washington, D.C. part of the FBI. where the counterterrorism group is based. And there was a plan the CIA wrote with Bill Clinton in 1997. It was called Presidential Decision Directive 62 for people who want to look it up and see the top secret document. But it called for combining the CIA to give its more kind of aggressive tactics to the FBI. So in 2001, it really changed, the FBI's tactics. And the FBI Counterterrorism Division has been in the process of kind of beating down all these 50 different field offices ever since then. But this operation in New York was actually opposed by the FBI field office. They knew what was going on and they frowned on it, but it was actually being run by the Secret Service. So it was Bill, after he served as president, and there's a lot of things I like about Bill Clinton. I just want to let that be known. I mean, he's a great speaker, and nobody can walk into a situation with 50 people, 50 stakeholders that don't know each other, and come out 3 days later with a plan. I mean, I'm amazed at his intelligence, but he had this kind of fatal flaw, and he had this operation going with Jeffrey Epstein, and he was a frequent visitor with the Secret Service to the Upper West Side apartment. And then that was a frequent, way of compromising all the people that, in Wall Street and, various law enforcement and so forth.
And so Bill Clinton was compromised that way?
Well, Bill Clinton was definitely on the film. I think Donald Trump was as well, to be quite honest with you, in 1993. I think there was 1 or 2 times where Trump stayed too late. I think there's a lawsuit going to be coming out about that. But we'll see. But Bill definitely was a frequent flyer, if you know what I mean. And I think Trump dabbled, if you get my meaning.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I know, the rabbit hole, goes really, really deep. Okay, so you kind of focus a lot on the DynCorp corporation, which, okay, so talk about DynCorp. I mean, what is it? It's Well,
let me transition from Jeff Epstein, because it turns out Jeff Epstein works for DynCorp. Okay. And it turns out DynCorp is just a black budget CIA cutout, or what they call a proprietary. It's basically, you can't just say, hey, I'm going to run a CIA sex operation on Upper 82nd, west on the, over Columbus Circle. Come on over. You have to, if it ever is uncovered, you have to, say, oh, this is a different company and so forth. So, but like his helicopters, for instance, his planes, all have DynCorp tail numbers and so forth. So that's the connection. And so at the beginning of this, so I've been involved in this from that angle for a while, but I started out my video series, where I work with researchers every day, and I really didn't want to go there to this kind of sex trafficking. I was trying to stay in the oil, going after DynCorp, going after oil in these other countries like, Iraq and Afghanistan and Haiti and other countries. And it kind of led me down this slippery slope. Everywhere I started looking where DynCorp was involved, DynCorpe. So there's kind of a wink there, DynCorp, we kill people. There was sex trafficking, and then there was also organ harvesting. So the Clintons are very involved in Bosnia in 1993. People remember that with NATO, the NATO peacekeepers, the blue helmets. They're very involved in 1999 with Kosovo. They're very involved in later on in Libya, Syria. The Bushes are also involved in Afghanistan. Later on, Iraq. it's DynCorp every time doing what I call setting up these rat lines, R-A-T lines, rat lines. They're not only setting up, where you can carry the oil by hand in these little 25-gallon drums, but they're also setting up arms lines, trade lines, drug rat lines, sex rat lines, and human organ trafficking. So all the above happens in Syria, for instance, with Hillary. All the above happens in Libya when she hires a private firm to overthrow Gaddafi. And that's where the story has taken me. It's just kind of following the facts. And then it also follows me to Libya, not Libya, but Haiti, and then follows me to Chicago as a potential hub of U.S. organ trafficking, bringing prisoners from Haiti, using the U.S. Marshal Service, bringing them to a secret prison in Chicago called Homan Square, Homan, Homan Square, where they're potentially harvested for their organs. I know that sounds unbelievable, but if you watch my series, you'll see how this just happens over and over and over again. And there's UN confirmation, UN independent UN reporting that happens all along the way that bears this out, these independent findings that supports this conclusion.
And so, like, to just make it clear, this war on terror is just like a big front for all of this? Is that kind of...
The war on terror is a big front for human trafficking, the spoils of war, human resources as well as natural resources. That's exactly correct.
Right, so it's, the real agenda is oil, power, anything that's profitable, drugs, sex.
Yeah. It's the ROI of war, It's the ROI of rat lines, to be honest. I mean, I didn't start out with talking about DynCorp at all. I started out talking about Eric Braverman and why did this guy make a run for the embassy. I was trying to find, I do a lot of, I have about a group of about 100 different researchers that watch my videos, and then they send me kind of like raw intelligence, newspaper articles and source documents, and then I try to synthesize it every day and turn it around into a video. And so I call that open media research. And it's amazing where open media research takes you. You just follow the facts, follow the blood trails.
Yeah,
you follow the dead reporters, and it takes you right to the story.
And I mean, like, besides yourself, I mean, how many other people are really, like, digging this deep, or, I mean, not, again, like, not even that, it can't really be all that deep if it's this pervasive. It just, right, it's a matter of, like you said, following the evidence and the facts, which, a lot of people just really, I mean, even so-called media don't want to go. I mean, like, they'll do a lot of media, like, they don't want to know. Would you say that, or?
Oh, absolutely. They want to divide everything up and shard everything so everything looks independent and doesn't look related. But what I try to do is I try to bring it all together and say, no, this is a habit. It's just like a person who's a bank robber. They have a certain modus operandi every time they rob a bank. Bonnie and Clyde, they would go in, Clyde would jump up on the bar, of the bank and point the machine gun down at everybody, and Bonnie would come in and around the other side after he did. And, after you see about 7 or 8 or 9 bank robberies and you say, well, did you get a good look at the guy? No, I didn't, but, well, did he wear this hat cocked to the right, and was it this hat? You show them a picture of the hat, and you show the picture, and did they jump up on the bar? And you go, yeah, that's exactly what they did. How did you know? I mean, I've looked at so many of these DynCorp operations where they train these police forces of UN peacekeepers, And I can almost fill in the blanks when somebody gives me the first story. And I don't care if it's Liberia, Congo, South Sudan, anywhere, any of the 32 countries that DynCorp International is in. I've seen this pattern so many times that if somebody it's almost like that guy who can name that tune after he's heard 3 notes.
Yeah.
You know? And it almost fills in itself. But I wait for the facts. I wait for the sources and citations to fill in before going too far. But it's the same story over and over. And what confuses people is it's sharded by the media as independent. Oh, this is a bad guy over here, and that's a bad guy over there. Well, guess what? We're training those bad guys to do that stuff.
Exactly. I mean, again, like I was going to say, I mean, it's really, I mean, I don't feel like things are all, you know, like I said, like that hidden when it's, if you just take the time and make the effort to look. But like I said, I feel like a lot of people don't really want to look. They don't want to know, press or not. But you also, and it's come out, which, you know, was kind of really disappointing for me to find it out, because I did watch that documentary about the white helmets. So talk a bit about that and how, right, the white helmets are not, you know, just the heroes or the saviors that documentary portrays them to be.
Yeah, so I report on external sources. So you know, I had my hero kind of in journalism is Cy Hirsch, and I had a chance to talk with him for about an hour. I can't remember where he lives in New York, but anyway, it's close to Central Park. And he said, look, you know, you've done a lot of good stuff. You do a lot of good research. But be careful if you always go on external sources, because you might just find what you're looking for, and you might just be, you know, doing a preconceived solution and just looking for evidence that supports your conclusion and not following the facts. And boy, do I remember that every day. I think about that every day, making sure I'm not trying to pursue a preconceived notion.
Do you meditate, George? Just out of curiosity. Do you meditate?
I think doing my videos is my meditation. No, I don't. I probably should, huh?
No, I mean, you know, because what you just said, I mean, that's really challenging. You know, I mean, that takes like discipline, right? To like not have a conclusion that you ultimately end up sort of proving. And to just follow the facts like you just said. I mean, that takes like a lot of discipline. A lot of people don't. You know, you got to be very mindful to do that. Yeah, well, and the 2 key people that I'm going to quote in Aleppo, you know, most of the white helmet story is these great guys that come in with these white helmets. They grab these kids, they pull them out of the dust, they put them in the ambulance. We get a picture on CNN about how dusty these kids are. You know, that one little boy, and that's the end of the story. And then they quote this guy who is the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights, SOHR, Syrian Observatory of Human Rights. Well, come to find out, it's actually his dad was very active in the Council on Foreign Relations up on 82nd Street, I think, or maybe a little bit north there, Central Park South. And Sabia is his name. And he's an oil executive. And, oh, by the way, he's not in Syria. He hasn't been in Syria, touched foot in Syria in 15 years. He's living in Coventry, England. And he's issuing all these press releases about what's happening in Aleppo. And CNN is quoting this SOHR about what's happening in Aleppo. So what he does is he just does these conference calls. So the other guy who funds the white helmets is his partner. One guy is an oil architect. It's called Petrofac. It's an oil pipeline architecture firm, and his firm is Consolidated Contractors. And these 2 companies basically do all the oil pipelines all over the Middle East, all over the Caribbean, all over Central and South America. They're always together. So they're 2 oil billionaires
that are producing our intelligence or our story of what's happening in Aleppo. Okay, remember, he hasn't set foot in Aleppo in 12 years since Assad's father was. There was an attempted coup, and everyone had to leave who tried to kill him. Well, there are journalists, though, that go there to Aleppo and actually meet with the people and see what the White Helmets are doing, and see that ISIS is actually using the people of Aleppo, or was using the people of Aleppo, as human shields. And they were putting the parents upstairs, and they were taking the kids downstairs, and when the parents were killed, they were creating these little orphanages, and then they were selling these kids off. The White Helmets were coming and taking these beautiful little, 6 and 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, and then sending them off to the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, to be married off. And so Ava Bartlett, Bartlett, I believe her name is. She's a fantastic Canadian journalist who is actually there. At this she went to the UN and had this very famous face-off with these press, and they said, "Well, what makes you so sure that the White Helmets are phony?" And she said, "Well, have you ever been there?" And he said, "No." And this one Norwegian guy, he goes, "Well, I'll tell you, the White Helmets are fake. They're just like the blue helmets in Kosovo. They're like the blue helmets in Haiti. They're the oppressors of the people. They are using the people as human shields." And then there's this other gal named Jessica Beeley, Beeley, who is actually in Aleppo during the bombing. You want to talk about courage? So she has several videos where she's actually reporting during airstrikes, and she's saying exactly what's going on. So the real people on the ground, real reporting, is where I go for my sources. Now, these are external sources, but I'm not relying on a guy in Coventry, England, who has a oil play to toppling Assad. I'm relying on individual independent journalists for the Canadian Broadcasting Company, etc., for my opinions of Aleppo. George Clooney is not relying on being in Aleppo during airstrikes. He's relying on whatever the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights is saying for the documentary. So I know I maybe went on a little too long about that, Adam, but I'm just trying to explain that sourcing that I do, I believe, is first rate.
Right. So are you kind of saying that Assad is also involved in organ harvesting of the people of his own country?
No.
Okay.
Quite the opposite. It's the ISIS.
See, that's what I'm saying, because this Assad guy, I mean, he's made out to be this complete brutal guy of the people of his own country in Syria.
Complete fabrication. And I don't quote myself because I have never been to Syria, but what I do is I quote these Ava Bartlett and I quote Jessica Beeley, who have been there and have done real reporting. And until I find somebody who trumps that, every once in a while you'll see a ISIS guy interviewed. CNN will send somebody in for a half hour and they'll interview an ISIS guy and they'll say something. But it's not that 3 weeks embedded reporting where they're actually seeing what's going on and seeing when the White Helmets show up and when the White Helmets leave, and they're not actually going to the orphanages and saying, what happened to those 6 beautiful girls that were here last night? Where'd they go? But I can tell you that there is a very active trade in the repressive regimes where the women have to wear the burqas, and they only have the eye slits that are that can be seen and so forth. There's a very good reason for that repressiveness, in that there is an active both domestic slave and sex slave trade in those countries.
So you also had said that the White Helmets are working together with ISIS. Is that right?
Well, they are ISIS. They actually are ISIS. I mean, it's even worse than that.
The White Helmets are ISIS. The White Helmets are ISIS?
Yeah.
And,
Well, it's a George Soros funded NGO. There are some good, I'm sure there has to be some good, Ava Bartlett's on our Facebook group, and it's called HRC for Hillary Rodham Clinton, Ratline, RATLINE. I've said a couple of times, there's some good white helmets, and always the answer comes back, and no, there isn't. There's not even, I always say, well, there's good ones by day and there's bad ones at night. And the reply always comes back, no, they don't even bother. It's all bad. So, but they had to make the documentary one day, so I'm sure there was some good ones, for part of the time. But the point I make in my series is you only need to infiltrate a great organization with a few people that come in at night during the graveyard shift. And then when the girls are gone in the morning, everyone says, what happened? And, well, I don't know. Where did they go? So, even great organizations like Médecins Sans Frontières, which is Doctors Without Borders,
right.
It's partially funded by Soros. Even them, from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. is when all the bodies go missing, all the deaths occur, and all the organs go missing. So
then, seeing, because, you just brought them up, the Doctors Without Borders. So let me ask you this question then, as to those attacks on the Doctors Without Borders hospitals, like 3 times, after the coordinates were given to not bomb this place because it's a hospital, 3 times it was like deliberately attacked for like a half an hour at one of them. I forget which one it was. So is that the one, like part of all of this?
Yeah, the one in Afghanistan is the most shocking because it was away from everything. The MSF hospital was away from everything. And I think you just had basically doctors with a conscience who said, I know what's going on. DynCorp had a lot of trouble. All the women were gone, because they'd fled. So they were encouraging the police, the Afghan police, to rape boys. They were pillaring them to these poles and rape these little boys and dance, do lap dances and so forth. But a part of that was this huge organ harvesting operation in Afghanistan. And they just, the CIA called in an airstrike. Now, the United States Air Force, my brother was in the Air Force, you don't get a full dossier on when you do an airstrike. You get coordinates. They don't want you thinking, the U.S. DOD does not want you thinking on your mission. They just want you to hit the target and we hit that target with a precision 5,000-pound bomb and completely destroyed that hospital. And that's, like you mentioned, that's happened in Iraq and it's happened in another theater. I can't remember exactly where right now. But these smart bombs are smart. You know from a Predator drone, all the surveillance technology we have, you know when something is a hospital and something isn't a hospital. Now, some people say maybe the terrorists were using the hospital to hide all that, but you don't kill, 50 doctors and 100 nurses to get 3 terrorists or 10 terrorists, but they did.
Again, so you just mentioned the word terrorist, but the terrorists are really kind of, aren't they kind of funding this so-called terrorism, like this war on terror? And it's, like you were just kind of saying, that it's really this, sex trafficking, drug trafficking, and organ harvesting. So, if you could when you say terrorist.
Yeah, if you look at the history of the CIA, and, it's not like the history of the FBI, which was kind of, J. Edgar Hoover was absolutely paranoid about Russian spies. He just, going all the way back to the, right after World War I, even before it was the FBI. So his focus was kind of political but when the CIA is created after World War II, it was always Wall Street's intelligence service. It was always Wall Street's intelligence service. And what they didn't want was having to go through Congress to do their operations. So right from the first day of the CIA, it was to use drug trade to pay for their operations. And one of the easiest ways was to go to these poor mountain people, where pick a mountain anywhere in the world that's good for growing opium, and say, hey, here's how you grow opium, and you can get 5 times as much money than if you grow lettuce or tomatoes, okay, or whatever, and get the people dependent on a cash crop. And then they're completely dependent on your food supply, your USAID drops of rice or what have you. And that is the CIA modus operandi, over and over and over. You can just put in a different country, but that's the methodology, and it depends on the drug trade. And all this other stuff, the organ harvesting and everything else, has kind of grown out of that. But from the very first day of the CIA, that's how they pay for their operation.
So I just wanted to say, because I get really, really annoyed. Like all you hear Donald Trump saying is, and everybody, that's all like the last few presidents about, keeping the country safe. Oh, I want to keep the country safe, and just this constant, boogeyman, the constant war on terror, and, Trump's, Muslim ban, and yes, also, Obama, the deporter-in-chief that he was called. So again, like all of this stuff is all just complete, again, like theater, because...
Kabuki theater. It's all kabuki theater. I mean, the CIA sometimes says they're, the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, is on our side. They said they're on our side in Libya and Syria. Sometimes they say they're on our side in like Afghanistan with the Mujahideen and Osama bin Laden. And then other times they say they're the enemy, where Osama bin Laden's the enemy. So the same thing with Saddam Hussein. He was an ally. And basically what they do is they let the kingpin, or whatever you want to call him, the strong man, make money for about 30 or 40 years. And then they pull the props out from under him. So it happened with Saddam Hussein. It happened with Gaddafi.
Yeah.
It happened with Noriega. So the CIA is smart enough not to run the operations themselves. They have these operations run by other governments, and they take a cut. So it's basically like a franchise operation. It's like they're Ray Kroc, and they go to different countries and they set up different operations.
Yeah, this is just crazy. I mean, okay, so you also mentioned, John Perkins, who wrote The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Do you know him, or?
I don't know him. I just read his book, and I went to Ecuador shortly after, reading his book. He writes quite a bit about the World Bank, and he writes a lot about these consultants that go in and talk about electrical grid loads and how he had to fudge, what their need was in order for them to get bigger loans by the World Bank. But basically, it's an economic form of control. And if the local government didn't go for all the recommendations that he made, and I can't remember if it was Brown and Root, or there's a group of about 8 or 9 of these consultants, that then he would say, okay, well, the CIA is going to be down shortly. So it was kind of like you have your choice. Either you saddle your country down with debt, and so that we can take advantage of the oil resources, which is what happened in Ecuador, or you can play the hardball like Venezuela, or you can play hardball like Cuba, and then we can do it the other way. So it's a very enlightening book because it shows you the other side. It shows you the kind of the what I call the soft side, the soft sell.
I read it. I read it a while ago, and I mean, you know, I met him like in the early 2000s when I was working upstate New York, and you know, I mean, he's basically like you know, he teaches, you know, what he does today. You know, basically like just teaching about like indigenous kind of cultural type stuff. I mean, I was always into all of that stuff, you know, for a while. And, you know, I didn't know he was the economic hitman when I met him at the time. But, I mean, I've interviewed him a bunch of times. I mean, I had him he came over here to speak a few times. You know, I helped to book him for a couple of events and things like that. But I've yet to be able to go on, you know, he takes people on trips, you know, to Colombia, various places like that. But, you know, I don't have the money for that just yet.
Yeah. Well, what I thought was so interesting about John Perkins is he's this person who had this. Unfortunately, he wasn't on the what I call the wet side or the hard side of this. He was on the soft side, which is the, you know, economic takeover, not on the coup side.
Oh, so he was on the softer side. Wow, that's pretty. If that's the soft side, then boy.
But basically, you go in and you say, look, we're going to take over the oil business here. We're going to give you a lot of stuff. We're going to build an electrical infrastructure and a water infrastructure and do some good things for your country. We're going to do some irrigation systems and drainage systems, and it's all going to be okay. And we're going to support you and your regime, and you're going to have a lot of good parties. But don't think that you're, you know, going to get your oil. I mean, don't kid yourself. You're going to live high on the hog. Don't worry. But we're going to control most of this. And if the person said no, we're going to nationalize the oil, like they did in Mexico or whatever, or Venezuela, you're going to have coups. And so they offer, you know, the CIA is reasonable. They do offer you a choice if you want to, you know, rule vertically, or you can go out of power horizontally. I mean, those are your two choices. And you know, he was on that softer side, and he recognized it for what it was, as coercion, economic coercion. And then he kind of had this kind of rebirth, this renaissance of his soul, to say this is wrong. You know, this is wrong. So he wrote the book, and he wrote another one with kind of an update. And then he goes back to the Andean mountains and lives with these people and learns their art and learns their crafts and learns their culture, and really becomes this kind of statesman for these indigenous peoples that have been kind of so, you know, so abused. You know, they've been taught to give up their old ways and learn how to, you know, make crack cocaine, you know, in the Peruvian mountains, you know. And he goes back to these villages, and it's just a really interesting guy who's really living the walking the walk, I guess is what I would say.
You know, so of course the time goes by like really fast, and I mean, I mean, if you were free next Wednesday night, I mean, I feel like you know, this is kind of like a to be continued.
Sure.
And yeah, so if you're free tomorrow, next Wednesday, again at the same time, that would be really great. And sure. People can follow you on Twitter, right? It's at George Webb, but without the E on the end of George, right?
Yeah.
And where else can people follow you and your videos? Just George Webb, like on YouTube?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you so much, George Webb. Again, like I feel like we barely scratched the surface. So yeah, tune in folks next Wednesday at the same time, and it'll be like a continuation of this conversation.
All right, Kat, it was a lot of fun. It was great.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Have a great night.